Narcofeminism Storyshare model is truly important to drug user organizing developed by women and non-men who use drugs. So the Narcofeminism Storyshare model here in the United States is something that we have found to be very special. We are taking drug user organizing women and we are sharing our stories. And there's something really beautiful about hearing your story shared by someone else. We don't often see our stories shared in the media. We see depictions of people not being able to connect, women who don't love their children, people who are neglecting and abusing. Those aren't the stories I know to be true today. I hope that as you watch, you'll be able to think of these stories as disrupting a narrative that has taught you to believe that people, and especially women who use drugs, who are pregnant and parenting, that we don't love our children, or we're unable in some ways to be honest or connect. When I think of drug-using women, I think of some of the most special women in the world. We've broken a lot of them by breaking their families and breaking their spirits and breaking their hearts. I hope these stories can help you disrupt these narratives.
Hi, I'm Tina.
I'm Abby.
And I'm Louise.
I'm Katie.
And I'm Dinah.
So, welcome to Narcofeminism. We are working with women around the world to talk about issues related to substance use and women's health and women's lives and our dignity and all of the different ways where substance use impacts our stories. Many of us have never heard our stories told. Many of us have tried to make sense of our lives in the kinds of ways where we say things like, it's a good thing they took my child, or so good I went to jail. That was a good experience. And I believe, and I think, those of us that have been working with this project believe that that's just us trying to make sense of things. That's just us trying to figure out, things like, well, maybe some time and space helped. It didn't have to be dehumanizing and animalistic and all of these other things. But we started out just talking about the issues that we as women who use drugs, and we say women with the X in it, so this is women, non-men. What are the issues that are important to us?
We've covered so many points in our Narcofeminism Storyshare project, and we've gone into so many topics and have a lot of nuanced analysis, but I think we have three overarching points that we want to make today. And the first one is just the sheer importance of being able to identify with a narrative. We see media and we don't see ourselves represented. We see women who use drugs demonized. We see our lives misinterpreted, distorted. We never get to hear a story, see ourselves on screen and think, that's me, that's my experience. The second point that we really wanted to emphasize today is the intersectional analysis that we bring to this. We bring different degrees of privilege to the table doing this work. And while some of us might suffer to some degree from criminalization and stigma, those of us who have more intersectional challenges, who are people of color, who are low income, who are more marginalized genders, those of us suffer much more. And the last thing that we wanted to cover today is somewhat segues from that second point, which is the respectability politics around drug use, and which drug use is appropriate and which puts that red A on your chest for addiction. And, we have all of these trends and memes around wine moms. These wine moms would never think of themselves as, parenting people who use drugs, and yet that's exactly what they are. But we know that the parenting people who use drugs that are truly pilloried, who are separated from their families, who get convicted under fetal assault laws, those are us. Those are people who are more low income, more marginalized, using more criminalized drugs. Before we get started, can we just have a moment of silence for all of the women? We know we have women currently suffering in prison right now for miscarriages. It's hard to believe that in 2022 almost, we have women going to prison for having a miscarriage. And in fact, the stories we read today are not our own. These are stories we read anonymously because they can't be read. You'll hear them in a different way if you could actually point them to us. And so we've chosen to
to do that. So if we could just have a moment of silence for all of the people that are sitting in prison, jail, hurting, can't talk, all of those things, and then we'll get started.
So I'd like to start with a story, and I'd like to give this content warning that graphic depiction of injection is involved. The air was crisp, and a cold breeze blew that October morning as I stood in front of my 8 Pee-wee cheerleaders, aged 5 to 7 years old. Today was the day we would know if all our hard work had paid off. These girls had busted their cute little butts 3 to 4 times a week the last 6 weeks in preparation for this day. Right now, they were nervously practicing their cheer routine, and I was nervously doubting all my hard work and dedication to these girls. I had given these girls all these last few months, yet always felt I could have done more, given more, if I didn't have a heroin habit. How good of a coach could I really be? Who could be a mother, wife, or cheer coach when they were injecting 1 to 2 grams of heroin a day? I asked one of the parents to watch over the girls while I ran to the bathroom. My anxiety was through the roof. I had to be at my best for my girls, and that meant I had to be cool, calm, and collected, and one nice hit would get me there. As I had finished preparing my shot, I heard the voice over the loudspeaker say my team would be up in 10 minutes. I knew I had to hurry. I pulled my pants down and slipped my underwear to the side. My femoral vein would never fail me. I took the top off my dull needle and put the syringe into the crater I had in my groin from the hundreds of hits I'd previously injected there. Within seconds, I was the calm, cool, collected coach my girls needed. I got out of the restroom just in time to take my place in front of my girls, who were standing perfectly in line. They looked at me for some final words before taking the field. I looked into the eyes of my girls and ended up locking eyes with my daughter, Lillian. Lillian looked at me with her big, beautiful blue eyes and said, "Mama, I'm so scared. What if I mess up?" I kissed her forehead and replied, "Go out there and have fun. I love you and I am super proud of you no matter what." In fact, as I looked at all 8 sets of eyes looking at me for some final words of encouragement, I smiled and said to all 4 of the girls, "You girls got this. Go out there, have fun, and try your best. I am so proud of you all, no matter what." With that, the girls marched onto the field and each smiled at me as they walked by. 3.5 minutes later, my girls walked off the field, their big eyes looking at me again, this time for my opinion on how I thought they did. "You girls did amazing," I said. "No matter what the judges decide, all of you are winners to me, no matter what." Soon after we all went back out onto the field, as the voice came over the loudspeaker, I felt my arms and hands being squeezed by soft, small hands. This was it. This was what we worked so hard for. Had I been able to do enough? Had my heroin use interfered with being able to give my girls what it would take to win the championship? To this day, I don't think I ever had been prouder of myself or of anyone as I was that day. When the Pee-wee Spartans were named first place champions, I was shocked. I looked at my girls, they looked at me, and all at once screams began. I had done it. I had brought these beautiful girls to first place. That day will always be burned into my memory because on that day, I proved all the critics wrong. On that day, I proved to myself that women could do drugs and still accomplish things and win. On that day, I learned I could not only be a good coach, but a good mother and a good person while doing heroin. I wasn't the piece of shit that society painted me as. I cared for and loved my girls, and nothing, not even heroin, could interfere with that.
It's one of my favorite stories.
I want to clap.
I do too.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite
I want to
stories.
clap.
My favorite thing is the piece that you say, is that when there's puppies and
Yes.
puppies and children in a story about heroin, somebody's gonna die.
Yeah.
Right? Like like something's happening. You almost anticipate that she's gonna definitely overdose in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
These terrible things are gonna happen. There's nothing good that could possibly happen in this situation. And the part that I love about it is the connection, because what we say about people that use drugs is they don't have the ability to be connected.
Right.
And here she not only is connecting with her daughter, but she's connecting with her team.
Right.
I imagine teamwork for someone that does heroin.
Right.
We're not team players.
Oh, that's unheard of.
Right. So
Right.
I really love it.
I think that for this piece, it resonated with the stories we tell ourselves about worth.
Yep.
And how it is that we can move ourselves forward. And the little voice in the back of our head that tells us we can't because somebody else said we couldn't. They're not looking at me, my heart, but they're looking at a behavior that has been defined by someone else, a system, or someone that wants to control me. And I think that when we think about people using drugs or women using drugs, we look at women in a different light.
Yep.
Because we are supposed to be morally
Yep.
at a standard.
We're supposed to sacrifice everything.
Yep. Or we're no good.
That's right.
If anything comes in the way of us with that standard, we're no good.
What would those other parents say?
Right.
The others.
Yes.
The others in all these stories. They were so proud of this woman who led these girls into a championship until they know truth. And I think the femoral vein injection is really important because that's one of the more stigmatized, and that's also sort of proof positive of someone that's very much hiding their use.
Right.
And keeping things, but lots of harm can come. And so all of those, there's all of these different layers of stigma, harm.
I think what stood out for me was the way that the other children looked at her, like that innocence, like that untainted way that, like, even though society sees us one way, like the way the innocence of the children, like they revered her, like they looked at her and there was no, they'd not been tainted with that, like the media, you know what I mean? Like the things that we deal with every day. So like they just saw her as this
coach.
fabulous cheerleading coach that they loved and wanted to be like,
Absolutely.
I want to also say that this would just be a run-of-the-mill mommy blog post if the woman had snuck into the bathroom to sip a wine cooler or take a benzodiazepine.
It would have been a funny joke.
Absolutely.
Right, it would have been a funny joke if white mommy goes and pulls, Sally or Karen into the bathroom, and they go down their Zimas, and
The Jolly Rancher.
However, those instances are those that we can talk about.
That's right.
And the instances that we're bringing forth are the ones that folks hide and fear, judgment.
And what do we talk about? One of our themes has been, what are the stories and things that we don't tell the truth about?
Yeah.
What is it that we feel we must lie about? What do we feel we have to be silent about? What is the world forcing us to lie about? Because yes, those children are going to be indoctrinated into a world where they hate their cheerleading coach if they find out about that, and they were unsafe.
Right.
And do you remember that cheerleading coach who did all that heroin, and the story may change.
Yes.
And they may find reasons to dislike, there was this thing that happened.
Right. So I'm gonna go next. I'm gonna give the warning for gore and blood, graphic depictions of injection, and general references to domestic violence. He hit a nerve, an electric shock of pain squalling down the meat of my thumb, and I screamed, full-throated, loud enough so that we both jumped, with the syringe still skewered into the side of my hand. "Don't do that," John snapped. John, usually so soft-spoken and measured. "I thought I was killing you." I used to try to be stoic. It's hard to be stoic enough to keep pace with your much older 2.5 tour heavy combat Vietnam Marine vet butch criminal boyfriend, but I did my best. I felt like it was the least I could do when I couldn't even get myself off. Me, the feminist harm reductionist who could sing the praises of autonomy all day long, but whose shitty hand-eye coordination left her dependent on a man to inject her, just like the most wretched, junky domestic abuse victim. Not that what John and I had was anything like the water shots and lies I saw dope fiends dole out to their poor, needy, skinny wives at the SRO John and I met in years and years ago. John and I might be worlds different. Me, the 29-year-old activist escort writer dilettante, the pretentious Seven Sisters dropout, and him, the steady 62-year-old dealer born in a New York City neighborhood you only got out of in a uniform or a box. But we worked. He was my street mentor, my running partner, my lover of 7 years and counting. He'd get me off first while he was still sick. He'd hold my arm gently in his big, rough, arthritic palm while he bent over me, scrutinizing the needle's movement studiously. That ritual junkie couple sang pains to, which seemed like bullshit when it was about anyone else. That intimacy when he injected me, gifting me with that pleasure, more solid than any sexual connection. That all seemed so real between us. So it was the least I could do to be stoic for him. But I wasn't fucking trying to be stoic anymore right now. The sodden smell of blood filled our bathroom as the hot sun hit the tiles and the wooden counter. We'd been at this for at least half an hour. I felt like his human pincushion, bleeding from half a dozen different places in my swollen hands. The amazing veinless woman, I used to joke with him bitterly, except that the dripping of dark purplish venous blood from 6 different open wounds made a mockery of that. I had veins, all right, and blood to flow through them. They just wouldn't cooperate with him and draw a flag to surge through the syringe. Time and time again, I'd jerk a bit in my seat, following his needle's progress with my eyes, thinking we'd finally gotten it, but no. It was the movement of an air bubble or the plunger or the blood already in the barrel, which had seeped in throughout this ordeal, threatening to coagulate the entire bundle of dope in the solution at any moment. Motherfucker, I kept murmuring under my breath. I wasn't sick. I'd been on the clinic for a couple of years at this point, but God, the sheer frustration. This little death by 1,000 fucking cuts had to be worth something, had to earn me the payoff of an actual hit. Tying off one arm and then the next, shaking off the pins and needles in one constricted arm and then the next, tying it too loose so then he'd have to retie it for me because I couldn't even do that right. Just try it, I kept shrieking at him every time I caught sight of what was ultimately a false flag. You're not going to be happy if I do, he kept replying, more and more frustrated now himself. Finally, I saw my own hand in the corner of my eye. It was the hand that wasn't currently pinned down to the bathroom counter, stuck with a needle that felt torturously dull now. I saw my hand raised. I saw my hand raised as if to hit him. I was shocked silent. Lowering that offending hand awkwardly, I think maybe he pretended not to notice. I don't remember, but maybe I apologized. I'm pretty sure I wasn't good enough to walk away. I'm pretty sure I sat there until he finally did coax a hit out of my veins, till he finally did inject me, whether he ended up missing some or not. But I stopped doing dope for a year the very next day. It was a miserable, depressive year full of silent days in which I only left the house to go to the clinic. But I did stop. I never thought in all of this fucked up dependency that it was me I had to be afraid of this whole time. Wow.
It's one of my favorite stories.
I think one thing that strikes me about that one is the respectability politics are so clear there. The author has so much contempt as a young woman for these other, needy, skinny, junkie wives,
Right.
and all the domestic abuse that she thinks is happening in other more low-income, drug-using couples. And yet she realizes that she herself is possibly the domestic abuser, or could be if she didn't stop herself.
Right.
And I think, that's that internalized piece that we carry around with us, that internalized stigma where we think we have to be the righteous dope fiend,
Yeah.
We are the one exception, You know, we are better, we are a cut above the rest. So instead of creating a community with each other, we think, well, I'm the one exceptional one. I'm the good drug user.
Right.
You know?
And especially with women.
Oh,
I
yeah.
think women are
Absolutely. I think more women are looking for that safe space that is false, right? And when we think about it, like the comparison of who is better than the other, and so I understand that in many instances.
You know, the author had received that old harm reduction advice of, if you're a woman, you know, inject yourself, you'll become dependent on abusive men if you don't inject yourself. And yet, you know, so many, like cis women especially, we have smaller veins. Our veins are harder to reach, you know? Often we don't, and especially if you have bad hand-eye coordination like the author in the story did, it's an impossible task. And so we don't talk about like the harm reduction value of assisted injection, of like communities of people offering assisted injection to each other. And how does that work, and how does that dynamic work, you know? Unfortunately, because of the criminalized nature of our communities, we can't we often can't create this supportive infrastructure with each other, or at least, you know, we don't hear it talked about, so we have to reinvent the wheel every time.
Right.
Well, I was looking around, looking around the room, I was like, there's gotta be something up here. And right there on the door. Protect yourself, inject yourself, do this by yourself. You need to know what you're doing. We also need to say, since it is 2021 and we are living in this time now, we're not talking about heroin injection. Yeah. We're talking about fentanyl injection. We're talking about injection of synthetic chemicals we don't even know what they are. People are saying and calling it heroin, knowing full well
It's not.
It's not.
It could be a range of things.
Well, and luckily we have a drug testing machine here, but many times what's on the sheet when we pull it out is 5, 6, what do we have? LSD.
Yeah.
Xylazine. You know, xylazine. We have all these chemicals. If you don't know what you're doing, you cannot protect yourself, period. And I came to a realization in my own life about these pieces, about being injected by someone or trusting someone to inject you. I have given this much consideration, and for years I thought, nope, it's important you learn to do it. This is your deal. You need to know what you're doing. And I think you should try to know what you're doing and all those things. But I, too, have shitty eye coordination, and I also know what not being able to inject yourself does. And like you are at risk for abscesses, skin and soft tissue infections. Like the harms that come from missed shots are really, we don't talk about it enough.
Right.
We don't talk about all the trips to the hospital that we didn't take. All the antibiotics we buy on the street, all of the people that die. You know, I've had so many people come in, my boyfriend died, he died of an infection. We don't count those with drug-related deaths.
Right.
Like that's not in the numbers.
Well, what it brings me to, because I have never been an IV user, and it's only because of the trauma of my ex-husband being an IV user. And when he would get to a certain point where he couldn't even see straight, he would actually make me like inject him, and I know nothing about that. And so he would like strangle me so I could find a vein to inject him properly, and I had no clue what to do. And so that was like, for me, not to say that I would have never become an IV user, but that was what kept me from being it, because of the trauma I experienced from him strangling me to the point where like I had to find a vein for him.
Let's be clear. There is nothing safe about not being able to, or the frustration of not being able to get yourself well, or not being able to get yourself, you know, we can say all day, oh, well, that's, you know, I can't believe somebody cried because they couldn't get a shot.
Yeah.
Well, you try to do something for 3 hours and can't get it.
Right.
And see if you don't cry.
Yeah.
Or see if you're not frustrated.
Right.
I can tell you the overdose experiences I've had and the experiences I've had where I've put myself in the gravest risks are related to frustration, are related to my not being able to take care of the situation I'm in, where I've used 50 needles and they're all over the table and God only knows whose is whose. All of those things that go on. And I realized that yes, maybe I should always make my shot. I should know what my tolerance is. I should know what drugs I'm using. I should do test shots. I should do all those things. But if I can't inject myself,
Yeah.
And I know that, and I'm going to have to inject somewhere in the back of my, back, or some crazy place that we've found that I haven't had to. I think that I do need to learn to trust people, find hit doctors, find people that are willing to do that, and in our safe consumption spaces have people that are, we so often say, oh, we're not going to let anybody inject you in the safe consumption space. Well, why not? What are the nurses there for then?
Right.
And the analysis of the phenomenon is so simplistic by non-drug users. Like, almost all the research is about, abusive men, injecting like helpless women and then leveraging it against them. There are no situations like yours. And in fact, most of the people that I've trusted to inject me have been other women, and so there's no actual documentation of these supportive communities we create for each other. And, I wish that I had been able to talk about assisted injection like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It was only recently that I had the conversation with Louise where, we talked about some harm reduction mitigation methods. Like, yes, like let people you trust inject you, but always make your own shot. Right. Like, I never thought of that before.
Or hold them. So when you want them to stop, you can hit them. Takes a long time to say stop.
Something.
Yeah.
Doesn't take anything to do that. Right. So when we're able to have the conversations, and this is what they mean by expertise. When we're talking about expertise and what expertise brings to the table, lived experience, that kind of expertise, we know this when we're allowed to talk about it.
Right.
And strategize. And in groups like this, we learn.
Yeah. I wish I knew, though. Like, I wish I had the knowledge that I have now back then, because I would have known how to handle it differently. But I didn't have the knowledge. And so I was, like, deathly afraid, where I could have been more compassionate and empathetic of where he was at in that space.
I have the privilege today of reading a story. There's warnings for graphic depiction of medical mistreatment. And we know that people that use drugs often suffer medical mistreatment. I began going cold turkey off the Xanax. After a few days, it was too much for my body to handle. I checked myself into an emergency room. When the doctors finished poking and prodding me, one came to me and asked me how many Xanax I was prescribed. I told him some random amount of milligrams. Obviously, I didn't remember what my actual dose was at this point during the most grueling time of my life. The doctor proceeded to tell me that my blood results showed that I've been taking 40 milligrams a day. He said that no psychiatrist would ever prescribe that much. He looked at me with his crystal clear, blue eyes, pale white skin, awaiting a response from me. No, you don't say, I snapped. I was clearly in that emergency room for a good reason, but thank you for your expensive expertise. I kept asking each of the hospital staff to contact the Red Cross because my son was stationed in Afghanistan and he needed to be made aware that I was there. I texted him, but the service was horrible and I couldn't get through. The staff kept passing the buck to the next nurse, the next shift, the next doctor, and finally the doctor told me he had no idea what I was referring to, and there was no way for him to contact my son. He didn't even offer to try. There was a woman lying in her bed on my right side, and you could even hear her frustration and surprise at their lack of compassion. I wasn't as surprised. As a drug user, I was used to the disdain with which health professionals treat people like me. They say drug use should be treated as a public health issue, but the public health providers hate us just as much as law enforcement. I told the doctor that I often thought I had 9 lives. Maybe this would be my last. After he walked away, the woman beside me was visibly shaken. She told me I had given her chills when I said that. I gave her chills, but the doctor smirked. What the fuck is wrong with our health providers? What was foremost on my mind was the bill that was most certainly coming for the ambulance ride, not the fact that I'd almost just died. I guess a small part of me did die that evening. It was adding to those lives I'd outlived, factored in somehow, and now I had none left. Even though I was in a fog, I could see that there were people there with all kinds of ailments. I saw patients who you could tell were regulars. One young lady in her mid-20s was there due to her diabetes. I could tell by her phone conversations that she knew exactly how long she would be there. And when she was ready to go, I could recognize the people there who were probably in chaotic alcohol use, who would come to sleep it off in a warm bed and then go back out to the streets. But me? I was just a junkie pill popper who didn't deserve respect or even the dignity of a curtain to give me privacy. From the person next to me, I was seemingly invisible to the staff. They just walked by me as if I wasn't there. I felt as if I was held captive in some next-level prison shit. Those of us who have been incarcerated remember that feeling of seeing the other side of the gates, but knowing there was absolutely no exit for you until they opened them for you. The emergency room was all the way in the basement, and there was no cell signal to make any connection to the outside world. I finally snatched that IV out of my arm and checked myself out. It was evident to me that I don't matter to them. I was just another junkie addict who'd gotten my comeuppance. I was due back at work next day, but there was no way that was going to happen, considering I couldn't stop my body from trembling or gathering my thoughts. It was as if I was having an outer-body experience looking down at my body while my actual self was floating above. So I decided to check myself into a different hospital, one in a more affluent area. I thought at least I would be treated with dignity and respect, viewed as a human being. After a couple of days in that hospital, I came to the realization that when you present yourself as a drug user, nobody sees you as anything other than that. I'd exhausted all of my options and come to the point where I had no other choice but to go to the place where drug users are forced to go. I checked myself into an inpatient treatment facility where my next nightmare began. That's another story. What I was left with was the guilt and shame of my kids almost finding my corpse when they got home from their Florida trip. I know now I'm a work in progress, ever evolving and ever trying to get it right.
It's a powerful story.
I think it's so clear there are small hints in the text that the author writing is a person of color. The way that they describe the doctor as having clear blue eyes and pale white skin as they speak to her from a position of power. The way that they talk about the hospital room, the emergency room, as reminding them of incarceration, and people of color are more likely to be incarcerated for drug crimes. So I thought, like, race is ever present in that narrative, even though it's never exactly named.
Right, race is ever present in the healthcare system, and there's no equity, and just a depiction of the emergency room being in the basement.
Yeah.
And I just I'm a visual person, and I just think of no windows, no light, you know, and talk about invisibilization, just invisibilizing me. The author just shared just the deep darkness, you know, you can't expect someone to take care of you that has the ability to take care of you.
I think there's something also really powerful about when you present yourself as a drug user, no one can see you. For many of us, it's the first time we can, privilege is hard to uncover sometimes. Hard to see your own privilege.
Yeah.
Drug use and being a drug user is an experience where some of our privilege is removed and we are invisible. And we become invisible. Different levels of it, different ranges of it. But these are some of the experiences we've had that help me understand what privilege is and how it is so insidious. I remember going to the hospital one time in my life with my husband, and he was a black man, and he was dying of cancer, and they didn't want to give him pain medicine. He had 2 months to live. They were scared he was going to sell his pain medicine. And I was appalled. I mean, this could fucking be. The fuck, what?
Yeah.
Like, my mom was at the same oncologist, like steady getting like whatever she needed. Like, what the fuck did you say to me? Like, are you guys out of your fucking minds?
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's something that people of color have to think about.
Yeah.
When we are even thinking about going to the hospital, we know the type of care that we are not going to receive.
I mean, I've gone, sorry to cut you off, but I've gone to the emergency room and have been discharged with the IV still in my arm. And nobody, like, they just gave me the discharge papers to sign. And, like, literally, I took a picture when I got home because I didn't even realize that I still had the IV in my arm.
And when you think about women of color, when you think about women who are currently using, women who are homeless, women who have children in ACS, you know, the systems, the consistent engagement with each of these systems are persistent, and they're all the same.
Insidious. That is insidious. The insidious hatred and lack of dignity. And we were going to do this to you. I mean, I remember I cried through an entire appointment one time. I couldn't take not one more. Not one more motherfucking look.
Yeah.
Not one more head shake.
Yep.
Not one more. Not one more.
Because they don't even have to say anything. It's the look that they give you of disgust and disdain.
And some people think that a happy ending to the drug war would be medicalization, would be the Portugalization, the organization of, you know, our nation, right? But I love that part in the story where the author observed, you know, they say that drug use is a public health problem, but the health providers hate us even more than law enforcement does.
Yes.
Like, big medicine is not better for us than, you know, than big, you know, mass incarceration. That is not what we want, you know? It's just another system of oppression where we can also suffer incredible pain and trauma.
Absolutely.
Where we are become unheard. Where we are treated like children.
We're
Yeah.
expendable.
The day was warm. It was the middle of spring, and Magnolia Lane's honeysuckles were in bloom. The air there was always fragrant and fresh. I had made the trip from New York to see my son and my grandmother. Raymond was my oldest son. At the time, he was just about 4 years old. I hadn't seen him for about 2.5 years after I dropped him off at my grandmother's house because I was a sex worker, struggling with substance use and living on the street with an infant. I was shuttling from friend to friend, and I was afraid I could not keep him safe. When I went to work, I often brought the men who paid me to where I was staying. Many times, I would take the client into the bathroom and schedule my dates when Raymond was sleeping. Once, I had gone over to one of my clients' houses with Raymond, received my pay, and asked him to keep an eye on my son while I went to get drugs. I was arrested and spent a week in lockup. Once released, I ran to where I left my son, and the client had not called ACS on me. I thanked him. He cared. He wanted me to change my life and clean up, is what he said. I wasn't ready. I was a good mom, and I loved my son. I had to take my son where I knew he would be safe. So I left him with my grandmother. It was the middle of May now, 2.5 years later. There was a breeze, and the sun was caressing my skin in between the shadows of the trees as I made my way from the train station toward my grandmother's house. As I walked up to the hill leading to the driveway under the canopy of a huge maple tree, I heard the geese my grandmother kept in the yard. They were talking to each other. There must have been about 15 geese circling my son, and among the squawks of the geese, I heard his squeals of sheer laughter. His arms were waving, and he was turning in circles as they continued to surround him, as if they were singing to him. Sometimes the choices that parents and pregnant people who use drugs have to make are the most difficult, because our society judges the entire person by the behavior, and society has determined that people who engage in that behavior are undeserving of being parents. Many parents and pregnant people who use substances have established a community and have support systems to assist with their children. However, these supports may be non-traditional and unknown to the general public. These non-traditional supports exist because they are necessary for parents and pregnant people using substances to thrive, care for each other, and care for our children.
Warning for a graphic depiction of overdose. Tracy, wake up. He's done it again. What? What are you talking about? I asked. You see, part of my PTSD is being easily triggered by waking up in an emergency. Often waking up to abuse, yelling, screaming, and violence has made it so I'm very confused when I wake up. I remember not knowing where I was at that moment or what was happening. I remember the blank confusion in my brain as my partner's voice screamed, "Tracy, I need you now." I sat up abruptly, shaking my head, my eyes barely coming into focus. "Get out here," Don begged. I could hear the urgency, the fear. I knew there was no question. Wiggs must have overdosed again. I knew the only thing that could cause my regularly calm man to scream and panic was the sight of a person dead on our living room floor. I went to jump off the bed, remembering I only have one leg, only a moment later. So I hopped over to the door, balancing myself as steadily as possible. I made my way all the way to the living room, desperately trying to get there without falling. There he was, my friend, my dear best friend, whom I'd revived from overdose so many times, his face completely white. My partner leaned over him, giving him the oxygen he so desperately needed. In that moment, I did not feel love or compassion. I felt rage. I skipped over to him as fast as I could. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt this furious. I was so goddamn mad. My partner looked relieved when I was finally at my friend's side. I looked at Adam, his cold, white, lifeless face and blue lips. I could see the bone structure so clearly in that face. Oh, how I hated him. I felt fury in my heart. My hand reared back and I slapped him as hard as a person could. His slack flesh moved just as if I had hit a dead person. It felt good though. It felt really fucking good. How could he do this to me again? I thought. This, after over a year of daily overdose reversals, after throwing him out of my house because I simply could not watch the inevitable happen, he was not the same man I ran the roads with, delivering syringes and naloxone and performing overdose reversals on others. Adam, Wiggs as I called him, had been my harm reduction partner and friend for the last 15 years. Never did I think our relationship would be strained by overdose. He was the one who taught me how to stay calm in the face of trauma and urgency. He was also so strong and even-minded. We taped an overdose and aired it on CNN with Sanjay Gupta to help change laws around naloxone. We fought together for Good Samaritan laws, and now I was accusing him of carelessness. Now I could not help but wonder if he pushed the boundaries because I was there to revive him. This was someone who in my mind was already dead. I grieved his loss after every overdose. This was the trauma of watching your loved one die every day, over and over, with only you standing in between their life and their death. God damn it. Could he not figure out how much dope he could do? Hell, I told him I couldn't do dope with him anymore. Adam knew I did not want him using around me. It had become our regular fight. He knew better than anyone how the police longed to put me in jail. They would surely charge me for his death. I wanted to be there for him, but this was a real fear of mine. My arm swung back again to hit Wiggs. This time a hand grabbed my wrist and my partner's scared eyes caught mine. What are you doing? Bring him back first. I shook my head as if the confusion was still complicating my thinking. Oh my God, what am I doing? I slowed down, began to breathe the necessary air into my friend. Finally, panic went through my heart. What if he died? What if he didn't come back this time? Fuck, I remember thinking. How did he get any drugs? How had this happened? I hated him because I knew what this meant. I hated him because the Adam I knew was gone to me. I had closed myself off to him. I knew Adam would die like my daughter, like all the other people who had died. It was simply a matter of time. It was easier to blame him than all of the shit I didn't truly understand. It was easier to tell myself he did not care about life than to face the god-awful truth that we had so little control over this new fentanyl-contaminated environment. I knew that one day I would not be there to bring him back. I knew one day this would be the end of my dear friend Adam. The truth is, we don't have a chance. None of us do. We're doomed because of a poisoned drug supply and the daily stigma which keeps us terrified of the hospital, unable to seek medical assistance. My anger, the pain, the hate I felt when slapping Wiggs, it belonged to our policies, our drug war or war on people, our situation, not my dear friend. I brought him back that day and a few times after that. Our relationship became more strained than ever. We retained only a shell of a friendship that had once been so full. Was it the drugs or was it the drug war? Our love lacked the oxygen it needed to live. I was unable to see that none of his actions were about me. They were about him. We too often think people are using at us, dying at us, but they are simply surviving the best they can. Yes, Wiggs is dead now, no longer here to laugh with me or cry with me. We loved each other through pain I cannot revisit. He loved me as my life changed. He loved me when I longed for death and could not see a way through. Some people would hear the story and say drugs stole Adam's life. They would be mad at heroin. The fact is that policy stole Adam's life. Hospital policy, which left him to die of endocarditis. Hospital policy, which required he have no friends or family present in his room because he was a known injection drug user. I miss my friend. Life is less beautiful without him.
Every time I hear that story, I tear up.
Yeah, I got chills. I think that is just so stark of a story that just gives the foundation of how folks are just not cared for. We do our best. We do our best as people, and it's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard to figure all of that stuff out.
I think this idea of people using at people.
Yeah.
Using at people. I like
Yeah.
that context
Mothers
at the end.
often think
Yeah.
he's done this to me.
Yes.
Why is he using at me? Why is this about,
Yeah.
you know, why is this happening to me?
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
And the phrase,
dying at me.
right.
You know.
And the phrase "you're doing this to yourself" is about when the person says it, it's because of them.
Right.
It's always the focus on them.
Here's another favorite. If she loved her family.
Yes.
Yep.
Right.
If she
wouldn't have
loved
died.
her kids.
She loves
If she
drugs
loved
more than her children.
Yeah.
If she loved her family. If she
Yeah.
if she had the capacity
Right.
for love.
Yeah.
She would have never done that.
Right.
Yeah.
Because people that love their families
They
don't do that.
things like that.
They don't have accidents. They don't have.
What stood out to me in that story, hearing it again, is the many, many times the author brought her friend back.
Yes.
Like, despite how under-resourced our community care systems are, we, like you said, we do our best with what we have.
Yes.
You know, Wiggs was, you know, protected and taken care of until he left the drug user community, until he was put into a hospital.
Yes.
You know, which had so many more resources.
Yes.
And yet, you know, was so oppressive that it was there that he died.
It was isolated as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But
know,
also the fact that like the disdain that you had and the anger and the rage that you had at him, you loved him so much that you brought him back so many times. You did not want him to die. You know, like that, like the fear of him dying, you'd rather live with being angry at him than him dying on you.
The author wakes up already in panic, already disoriented, already traumatized. From all of the, you know, the incredibly traumatizing things that we as women who use drugs, both cis and trans, experience. You know, the fact that we are more vulnerable to domestic abuse, the fact that we are more vulnerable to sexual assault, especially from people in power.
Yes.
You know, and we have so little recourse because, you know, well, you know, you were using drugs, you were intoxicated. Like,
Yeah,
what
it
did
was
you
your fault.
What did you think was
You
Yeah.
had a low-cut blouse,
Yeah.
short
Right.
skirt, and you were using drugs.
And you know
The
you were smoking
trifecta.
crack.
Yeah,
I mean,
Right.
you like it.
So
Yeah.
the author actually is experiencing, you know, as a disabled woman, that, you know, and as a traumatized woman who is obviously a survivor, she is experiencing much more trauma in this event already, as soon as it starts happening, than her partner is.
Right. Even
Yeah.
before she knows what's going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's traumatized.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? And that's what really is so poignant in this story, is that the resilience, however, the inability to kind of see a person as a person listening to this story, is that the author is living with pain and traumatization already. Already. And it's a thought, and yet and still the action comes after that.
Yeah.
No matter what.
Yeah.
That's right.
No matter what.
Yeah.
You know,
Reflex.
and no matter what, I'm going to protect my friend. I'm going to be friggin' angry.
Yeah.
I'm going to yell, and I'm going to scream, and I'm going to say why.
Have some
and I'm going to
feelings.
protect my friend.
But I'm gonna put
as
myself
best as I
aside,
can.
and I'm gonna.
And
yeah.
and what's telling in this story is also the mourning.
Yes.
Because this doesn't happen once or twice.
Yes.
And every time it happens, her friend is someone different.
Yes.
And it's the longing for her friendship. It's the longing for that person. And so who is it to say that we don't have those feelings? That we don't have that ability to care for each other. No matter, we can get angry.
Yeah.
Right.
We can say, you fucking idiot.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But the feeling, the concern, the empathy,
Yep.
right? That goes beyond, like, you're safer with me than going to a hospital.
And let me tell you, it's the opposite of what we see in the media.
Yeah.
So, because all we ever see is drug users making the choice to leave one another.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We only see, oh, let's get the fuck out of here.
Right.
Yeah.
And us running off. And
Yes.
let me say, that does happen.
Right.
And that happens because of fear.
Yeah.
That happens because of the terrible...
The policy.
And the
Policies,
policy,
the laws,
policy.
the
There's
DIH
no Good
policies.
Samaritan laws.
Yes.
But I'm gonna tell you, community naloxone did something beautiful for like an onlooking experience, and
Yes.
that was we got to see. I mean, let's face it, all good interventions around substance use came from the minds
Of
drug
course.
users,
Of
right?
course.
Yeah.
That
There's no-
expertise,
Yeah.
but community naloxone had something special attached to it.
Yes.
Here, all of a sudden, we were given the opportunity not just to be involved in like needle exchange or these things, but we were involved in the very bringing back
Life-saving
to life,
measures.
the
Yeah.
life-saving, and I have never watched someone walk away
And that culminates
from somebody that's dead while they had naloxone. in their
Absolutely.
system.
Yeah.
I've seen them
Absolutely.
fuck up naloxone really bad, not do
Yeah.
a good job with the overdose reversal. But I have never seen them look and say, "Well, I've got naloxone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Got somebody that's not doing great.
Yeah.
I'm getting the fuck out of here."
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's
Never.
not what I've seen.
And I have a friend who talks about this, who calls, these drug user organizers, super reversers. Like when you have revived 80 people in a year.
Yeah.
When like one person I know on a USU call had, when you have revived maybe hundreds and hundreds
Yeah.
and hundreds of people over your lifetime of drug use.
Yeah.
What kind of trauma does that inflict on a
Yes.
person?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's right. And when somebody doesn't come back,
And what I love about this conversation is that there's no judgment,
None.
right? There's no judgment. Of course, we feel that, if folks are close to us,
Yeah.
like, why are they doing it to me?
Yeah.
And we have to ask ourselves, why do we ask that question,
Yeah.
right?
as we think about death,
Even in our context, like,
Yeah.
why are we asking that question?
and as we think about death by distribution,
Yeah.
which is the low-hanging fruit. Which
Yeah.
is, let's be clear. This is the way we separate people of color from white people. Oh, those are the drug sellers. Like, this is all code. This is all fucking code words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when we think about what death by distribution does, when we think about drug-induced homicide laws, we have to think about the parents who are in so much pain and they want someone to blame.
Of course.
They need someone to blame.
course.
And we have not given the language to the powers that be. And that's the role of drug user organizers and our expertise.
Absolutely.
Because we need to honor the pain
Yeah.
that people feel. It's a terrible pain to lose someone of an overdose.
Yeah.
I've watched people want to, every time somebody overdoses, there's discussions about whose fault it is. Oh, that
It's
girlfriend.
always gotta be
that
at fault.
girlfriend.
Yeah.
That girlfriend ain't
Yeah.
got her. That somebody is at fault.
Yep.
And you know what? We have to do better. We have to do better.